All right, good morning. So I want to talk to you guys about two things. First, I want to let you know that one of my desires for the online church and basically the whole conversation that's been going on with it has finally happened. Someone has written an attempt at a theology for one of the components of online church. So Jason Poling wrote a theology of the metaverse, and it's a free document that you can download and check out. It's I think 28 pages, and yes, I'm the kind of theology nerd who downloads things, prints them, and puts them in Duotang, so I have a physical copy to critique and whatnot. I like the intent behind what Jason was trying to do here. I disagree with a lot of the things in it. I'm going to be doing kind of like probably a 6 to 10 part series addressing some of the issues that Jason brings up. But what Jason attempted to do there by trying to really nail down a theology for like how and why we can or cannot use the metaverse as a place to do church, do ministry, all those kind of things. It's one of the more well thought out attempts that I've seen. So I want to give credit to where credit's due. Even though I disagree, at least someone's actually doing real theological work on this topic right now. I was blessed to read it, and I'm hopeful that like the discourse can kind of get itself back on track now that I'm starting to see this kind of stuff. But because of this document, what got raised by it, I won't quote the sections because we'll do that in the actual review section. What got brought up by that was the ideas of what do you do with the sacraments when it comes to specifically VR church, but as I've described in another video, VR church as we understand it is online church, just the screens and audio are closer to your body as a person, kind of hijacking your bodily responses, but you aren't virtually somewhere else. You are still online using technology as a barrier. So what he addresses there is that essentially the sacraments, so baptism and communion, are symbolic only. That we've really flirted with this as evangelicals in modern churches, in that while we have physical baptisms and some physical communion, that really it's the symbol that is the most important thing about the sacraments. And I would disagree. When I look at the scriptures and I look how the sacraments were given to us, there is a strong connection to the what do you call it? The real world. There's a strong connection for a reason, and there's some things that just aren't being discussed when it talks about like the symbol only. Because if you needed to be able to do these things in order to be a Christian, then having them as a symbol only kind of cheapens the experience. And so where I want to talk about that first is with Christ's crucifixion. If the sacraments, which point to Christ's crucifixion, only need to be symbolic, then why on earth was Christ's death in person? And that's a real thing to consider, because Christ, being God, could have done something symbolic as opposed to something literal. Because what he did in taking on human form, taking on human flesh, onto his perfect member of the Godhead, Trinitarian personhood, taking on human flesh, what he did there is kind of marry the power of the symbol with the lasting effects of the temporal, I guess, if you will. And there's a lot of Trinitarian theology that you can kind of put through this process when you're thinking about it. But like Christ, being all-powerful, did not need to die on a cross if he didn't want to die on a cross. He could simply just make it so that it didn't happen. There's a reason why he died on the cross, took bodily form, and like gathered us to him in his church in bodily form as well. And I think the scriptures point to this by the fact that they don't just rest on symbolism. They embrace this in-person thing too, this in-person necessity for church to exist. What the metaverse tries to do is tries to boil it down to only symbols and take away from the fact that stuff does happen in person. And I think that's wrong. I think that there is a reason why we get baptized in water and not words, even though we are baptized by the word, like we were baptized with the Spirit, that kind of stuff in our church. But like the declarative action that is baptism is done with water for a reason. It could have been done by a lot of different reasons, or a lot of different other methods by Christ, where it would just be words or symbolism. In fact, other religions do this. To become a Muslim, you don't get baptized. You don't have to, you don't have to wear certain clothes. You don't have to do it. Like, to become a Muslim, you simply say a prayer, and then you become, a Muslim for all intents and purposes. And your father says this to you when you're born a Muslim. That kind of stuff. Like this pure symbolism thing exists elsewhere, but it doesn't exist in Christianity. Christianity is this mix of symbolic, not symbolic realism, but symbolic embodiment as human beings. We are not just souls who are stuck in bodies. We are souls who primarily practice our righteousness and our unrighteousness through those bodies. What happens to everything, from your eyeballs and ears outward is important. And so when you talk about the sacraments, those are things that the Bible only instructs to be observed through your body, not through just your mind as like a symbol to be recognized. At the bare minimum, like the Passover meal that Jesus co-opted into communion, the do this. Whenever you do this in remembrance of me. That's what Christ was talking about. At the very minimum of him co-opting the Passover meal, once a year when a symbolic meal was eaten, now they would, remember what Jesus' new covenant was, how it was demonstrated, and they would remember him through the breaking of bread and the sharing of the cup. And that would happen communally. That couldn't happen just at any meal. At the very bare minimum, it would happen at Passover when they were celebrating, and now they're celebrating communion. And the Christian tradition has now done that at some cases on a weekly basis, where they always have communion. And I think that's important, because he chose something that anchors people together in a place to represent the body that was anchored to a specific place for the covenant to exist. Christ died on a specific cross in a specific area, for a specific people. He didn't just, arbitrarily do any of that stuff. There are reasons why he did that. And the same would go with baptism. If Christ didn't actually have to die, then the entire nature of Christianity changes. But he did, in fact, die. And so our baptism, if it doesn't need to happen with actual water, if it can happen with virtual water, with pixels and an avatar, and the fact that we are baptizing avatars, literally the name of other gods, false gods in this world, but we're saying that it represents a Christian being baptized in the metaverse. The fact that we're doing that is just squirrely as all heck. But Jesus had to die a literal death for that atonement to be applied to us. And so our baptism means something that it's, with water. Now you can get into all sorts of debates on whether or not you're sprinkled or dunked, or if you're baptized as a child or an adult or as a believer, but that's a real thing. And I think it needs to be a real thing. And what you have with the metaverse, what you have there is this really weird worshiping in spirit, but not in truth. The truth can be anything. You can redefine anything you need to be as truth. Like, you can say that you were baptized in water when no water was present, right? And I know that puts an onus that, if you don't have water, you can't get baptized. And I think that's important, that if you don't have these things, you can't participate in these things. If you don't have, you can't, I don't think you could make the argument that you can use whatever substitutions you want for the Passover meal. It's given to us in very plain but very broad terms. Like, you have to have bread and you have to have wine. And you can argue about the whole wine grape juice thing, but you can't use Kool-Aid, okay? You can't use Kool-Aid, and you can't use gummy bears. You can't use orange juice, and you can't use, I guess pizza would actually be, like bread, I guess. But, you couldn't use, orange juice and Slim Jims to be able to do communion, okay? Because there's a reason why it's bread and wine. Those things point to other parts of the scriptures and their relevance. The symbolism is anchored to the real thing. And what you have with online sacraments is that symbolism ripped from the real thing, and then a representation, another symbol being mirrored to that. So you no longer have people who are being baptized and having a symbol and a real thing kind of married together in a place called church. What you have is the symbol of baptism married to another symbol called, digital graphics of water in the, alt space. Those are different things. That is a fundamentally different thing than what you have when you have a baptism. And so saying that it's a Christian baptism when it's a fundamentally different thing stops being something that, unifies us all, and it's something that, unifies like the in-group, like the people who are using the virtual baptism. It gives them that borrowed authority of, oh yeah, we're getting baptized. Just like the churches in real life are getting baptized, we're simply doing it online. Well, no, you're not. You're taking another symbol and marrying it to that. And you see this, and I brought this up before, you see this in cults. You see this with the Mormon Church, which does communion exactly the way we do it, except they do it with bread and water. Now, that's important that they do it with water, because it's no longer the blood of Christ that's being shared, among the people that it was shed for. Okay, it's now water simply to make it another symbol. You have, the symbol that communion is, and then you marry it with another symbol and it becomes a different thing. And the same thing goes with baptisms. You see this with the Mormon Church as well. You have baptisms for other people. You can have baptisms for people in the Mormon Church who aren't Mormons. I know that I've been baptized by proxy by Mormons that I know. Okay, and I know that doesn't count for anything, because I wasn't the one going under the water and coming out in obedience to Christ in declaration that I believe in him. The Mormon Church just dunked someone and said my name. Okay, so I understand that kind of stuff has happened, and that it's a different symbol, that it's the Orthodox symbol married with something else, and now it becomes something else. And that is exactly what is happening with the online church. We are seeing essentially a reverse cult, and it's becoming more clear day after day as I keep looking into how people are thinking about this, that there are orthodox beliefs. You could never tell. Someone would be able to confess Christ with all their words, checking every box for every spiritual gifts assessment that every church has come up, or like believers assessment. They'd be able to pass every member's requirement, all that kind of stuff, at an intellectual, verbal, and mental level. But their practices are wrong, and they're being married to this as if they're equivalent, and they're not. So when you hear someone talk about online baptisms, that's not a thing. It simply isn't a thing. What it is the symbolism of baptism that is an Orthodox thing in Christianity being married to another symbolism, literally another gospel. I don't know why people aren't seeing this. It's being married to another gospel, another symbol for us, and being put together and said, this is the same thing as the person who, went into a baptist tank or a river and was placed under the real water and pulled out of the real water in public for people to see as a declarative action. It robs all of the things that Christ built into the sacraments for us. And it really isn't being talked about. We're looking for excuses to be able to do this online for no other reason than we want to. There's no call for Scripture to do this. There's call to reach people, and I think you can reach people online. You can have communication online, but what you can't have is church online. And it's becoming more and more clear the more and more I look into this. Kind of wrap this all up. How I want to kind of anchor this is this idea about, the sacraments. There's two that everybody agrees on, but there's actually a third that I argue for my own personal belief, my own theology, that I think is a sacrament, that I think is one of the ways that you simply could not have. You simply can't have online church. If you can't see that you can't have online sacraments with baptism and communion, then you can definitely see it if you look to this act as a sacrament, and that's marriage. Could you have an online marriage the way you can have online baptisms and online communions. If you had a husband and a wife who are on other parts of the country, and they both log into their VR church and invite all their VR friends, and so they can get VR married, and they stay there. They're doing exactly what you do with the online church. You're not insisting that in-person gathering because the experience is the same and because the technology allows that kind of connection. Why would a VR marriage, a VR wedding ceremony, be valid or invalid then? You have a husband and wife who aren't, being given away and saying vows in the presence of witnesses in a real place and then coming together to consummate that marriage. Why wouldn't that count? Why couldn't you just get married to people across distances as if we all know why? It's because marriages are the joining of two people. It is the covenant of two people being brought together by God. That's what the covenant is. And even Jesus says this, what God has brought together, let no man tear asunder. And we're going to assume that because the communication's there, because the alt space makes it looks like they're standing beside each other, or that their avatars are standing beside each other, as if that isn't just, putting false deities in the mix of what should be an image of what Christ is to the church. Like that's how wild it's going to get. I'm calling for it now, that there's online marriages and people are no longer treating marriage like the event and specific thing that it is, and instead dealing with online proxies simply so that they can be married. I don't know where this is all going to go, but what I'm seeing with the online church, again, is this kind of weird reverse cult thing happening, where you're having orthodox beliefs being married with unorthodox and frankly heretical practices in some cases, and then just being called Christian. This borrowed authority of simply being able to call things Christian because you can make an alt space look remotely like a megachurch online. And I think it's a problem, and I think it's something we're going to be sorting out for just decades if we don't get a handle on this soon enough. So I can't wait to dig into this and to really kind of establish what proper theology of internet ministry and worship might look like, and I don't think that it's going to be what a lot of the people in the space are talking about. I seem to be the only negative voice in this talk that actually wants to engage and doesn't just want to write people off and then not do stuff. Like, I'm for online ministry. I think like an online or a metaverse alpha group would be great. I'm just not going to concede that that can be church. That what happens in an alt space or a VR church or a Zoom room, that's not church, because church is a place and the internet is a thing, and there's no way to get around that. So this has been an extra long video, kind of ranty. I'm going to leave you guys alone, but looking forward to this. We'll talk to you soon.